Yo everyone, welcome to my predictions and breakdown of the entire UFC Fight Night Vettori vs Dolidze 2 fight card. Every single fight on this card, besides the main and co-main event, has a clear or large favorite in them. I've done my very best here to put together some solid picks that I think will be pretty good for this fight night. Watch the whole video through to see how many underdogs I did end up picking at the end. But before we get into this card, let's go back a bit and talk a bit about the last fight card, which was UFC 313 Pereira vs Ankalaev. We did very well on the last card overall in bets and picks. We got almost every single confident pick correct too, including both the favorites picks and the underdog picks. If you would like to see what my bet results were and my overall thoughts and reaction of the event was, the video is up on my channel and I'll leave a link on this video to that video covering everything so you guys can check it out. Also, I did see the very positive feedback on the betting guide for UFC 313, which I appreciated immensely. I originally planned to only do the betting guides for the pay-per-view events, but I might start doing them for every event moving forward. It won't be for this fight night since I've been pretty busy unfortunately, but I will be sprinkling betting advice throughout this prediction video, so be on the lookout for that. If you'd like to see the betting guide for every fight night as well as the UFC pay-per-view events, let me know in the comment section below and show some love to the channel by liking the video and subscribing. As always, I'll be starting with the prelims and working my way all the way to the main event. Timestamps are in the description and the comment section below if you'd like to skip to any fight in particular. We're going to start with the first fight of the card, which is Yuneisy Duben versus Carli Judice. And can I just say, what the heck are these odds? I don't think Carli Judice should be this much of a favorite over anyone, especially since she hasn't won a fight inside the UFC and has lost her last two fights. One being on the UFC and one being on the Contender Series technically. Granted, her competition has been quite solid, with her last loss being a split decision loss to Gabriela Hernandez, where she was looking quite solid in the third round of that fight, but she ultimately lost that matchup. This really showcased that she is comfortable in the octagon and she does have the cardio to go the distance. But when it comes to the massive underdog in Yuneisy Duben, a lot is unknown about her, in my opinion. I could only watch two fights of hers with no other fight tape being shown. Although we do know that she finished every single one of her opponents so far, I watched her fight before the Contender Series where she was applying a lot of pressure against Ingrid Garcia with a record of 0-0, and her corner ended up throwing in the towel for her. I don't even really count that as a win because her opponent had literally never fought before, according to Tapology, but nonetheless, she was able to get her breakout performance against Shannon Clark on the Contender Series where she was a massive plus 800 underdog, and she ended up knocking out Shannon Clark in the first round of that fight with a massive overhand right. The girl has grit, she has the ability to hunt for a finish, which not a lot of WMMA fighters have in my opinion. A lot of them have grit, don't get me mistaken, but the vast majority are happy taking the fight to a decision, which is reflected in the stats. I don't know what Duben's cardio is or will look like since there is no fight tape on her going the distance. She's been finishing a lot of her opponents early, so it's very hard to pick here. In my opinion though, Carli Judice is the better striker and the more technical of the two on the feet. She has versed better level competition in the UFC. She's showcased that she can go 3 rounds with nice cardio. She's got solid technique, guys. I will most likely be picking her to win this fight just due to the unknown factor. But if you want any betting tips for this fight, I might end up putting something on Duben to win this fight just due to the odds being so massively disproportionate. It won't be a full unit, but it'll be something. Carli Judice is the pick here. Going with reliability over the unknown here. Worried a bit about her since she is pretty hittable and lacks some head movement. But man, gotta pick her over Duben here. Moving on to Josiane Nunes versus Priscila Cachoeira. This may be the first time I've ever seen two WMMA fights on the card that are back-to-back that could potentially be outliers to the decision statistic here. And what I mean by that is that over the majority of WMMA fights go to the decision. This is statistically speaking, of course, but both of these girls are stand-up fighters and absolute scrappers. I could see a knockout coming here, honestly, just because of how these girls fight, or at the very least, a very similar fight to Cachoeira versus Kim. If you haven't seen that fight, insane amount of damage and punches absorbed by both fighters. One of the best round 3s of a fight I've ever seen in the UFC. That's including WMMA and MMA. Both girls hit relatively hard in this matchup, but I'd give the technical edge and maybe even the power edge to Josiane Nunes. She just reminds me of a little Yoel Romero since she looks like him a little bit. Very peculiar build she has with really no neck as well. But yeah, I'm gonna go with Josiane Nunes as my pick for this fight. Not much else to say about this fight since the girls are relatively close in style, but a lot of things in my mind lean towards Josiane Nunes. I also think she has the better defense and better output if the fight does go the distance as well, just to add that on top of everything. I might even look into the props for this and see what KOs or finishes in this fight pays or inside the distance pays. I do want to see how much it will return, and that could be something I'd look out for. Like I said, Josiane Nunes is the pick, going with her by KO or decision win. Moving on to Daniel Barez versus Andre Lima. Pretty solid matchup here. I'm expecting a bit of fireworks in this one. Andre Lima, people probably remember him mostly from the Igor Severino fight, where he won via disqualification by getting bitten on his arm. The guy ended up getting the bite tattooed on his arm. Looks pretty sick as well, actually, but as a fighter, he is pretty solid. He can fall back on some decent grappling, but he is predominantly a striker. Strong puncher with a Muay Thai base, has pretty solid defense when striking from a distance and inside the pocket, which I like a lot. Daniel Barez, on the other hand, pretty light on his feet, constantly bouncing in and out. He is pretty decent. I need to look at the odds, but could potentially see myself chucking something on him if he was like plus 350 or something. But to cut this pick a little short here, I do think that Andre Lima is just the better overall fighter in this scenario. Not saying he's perfect or anything, I just believe that this matchup favors him a little bit because Daniel Barez engages a lot, but he engages pretty recklessly. I've seen him get tagged a lot in his fights when he tries to apply pressure, and someone as solid as Andre Lima is gonna make him pay for those mistakes, most likely by knocking him out. If Daniel Barez fights a bit more cautiously, I could definitely see this one being relatively close because of his solid kicks and footwork. But I just do think that Andre Lima is that tad better. Andre Lima is the pick. I'll put him in my confident picks list as well, just because I feel pretty certain he gets this one done. Moving on to Stephanie Luciano versus Sam Hughes. Classic striker versus grappler matchup here, in my opinion. You got a relentless pace wrestler and grappler in Sam Hughes that just does not slow down. She has great cardio over 3 rounds. She can inflict damage on bottom and has quite a few ways to get takedowns, including throws, single legs, and double legs. The only issue with her game is that her stand-up isn't the greatest. It's good enough to get stuff going on the feet, like getting stuff ready for takedowns, but it's not good enough by itself to win fights. Stephanie Luciano is the opposite. Good at keeping range and striking her opponents from the outside. She isn't the fastest or most explosive, but she doesn't seem to tire easily and has decent cardio herself over 3 rounds. And she can change up where the strikes come from with some sneaky uppercuts and kicks. I'm looking at Sam Hughes as a plus 210 underdog right now, and I honestly think that's good enough odds to put a bet on right now. I also think I'd edge this fight to her as a pick, just because I've seen Stephanie Luciano crumble before under a bit of pressure when someone's willing to keep taking her down, and I think Sam Hughes should be able to take her down at least a few times in this fight. I watched the Toledo Alencar fight, and Toledo Alencar was able to take her down multiple times in that fight, in her first fight with Toledo Alencar, which was a draw. And although Alencar is a grappler, she is a predominant BJJ grappler, not an esteemed wrestler as far as what I know, so she took her down multiple times in that fight with Luciano. I think Sam Hughes can do the same. Sam Hughes is the pick and the first underdog pick of the card, so let's go, guys. Moving on to Carlos Vera versus Josias Musasa. Carlos Vera fights almost identically to Ryan Hall. Every time I watch the fight tape, both in his stand-up and on the ground, I just keep thinking this guy looks exactly like Ryan Hall, and he's trying to mimic his entire style and his game plan, but it does make sense since he trains under Ryan Hall himself. But still, it seems like a very interesting way to adapt someone's style. If you guys don't know who Ryan Hall is, he's the guy that would roll for a leg lock all the time in the UFC. It worked when he rolled for a leg lock against BJ Penn in their fight together, but it didn't work too well when he tried it on Ilia Topuria and he got knocked out cold for trying it. Josias, Musasa is a stand-up only dude, very good takedown defense and very good striking overall. A little telegraphed for my liking, but the man does look like he hits hard. He's got some solid pressure, and he can go all 3 rounds if he needs to. I'll be honest here with this pick, and I'll give you guys 2 main lines to what I see happening here. I think the majority of the time, Musasa either gets a knockout, or the other main line would be Carlos Vera gets some sort of submission, most likely a leg lock, because he just constantly rolls for it. He's got pretty decent kicks as well, but I don't see him knocking out Musasa with them. Those are the main lines for betting props, I think. But to be safe, I think Musasa by KO or decision is the most likely outcome here. The guy is solid, he seems to be good enough to avoid a lot of bad grappling situations, and he keeps most of his fights on the feet. I don't think he will engage much in the ground and pound, in my opinion. Might have Vera standing back up to keep this fight on the feet instead of playing in his guard. Josias, Musasa is the pick, most likely by KO, could be a decision as well. Moving on to Seung versus AJ Cunningham. I don't even know why AJ Cunningham is being matched up against Seung. You can probably guess by my pick after this explanation, but Seung, in my opinion, deserves a little higher competition in the division, not someone 200 ranks below him right now, especially with AJ Cunningham coming off his first round TKO loss to Ludovic Klein. There's no shame in losing to Ludovic Klein. The guy has showcased that he's a hot prospect right now, but still, I believe that AJ Cunningham should be facing lower level competition at this point, and I don't think lower level competition is a way to describe Seung. Seung is a decent striker, has pretty decent power too, but where he shines is in the wrestling. The guy shoots very well-timed takedowns. He's also very deceptively quick to shoot and sets up takedowns well with his striking. And on top of that, he has a decent submission game along with just doing damage on top position, and showcased all of these skills in his last win versus Baijing Jalesi. AJ Cunningham has got some decent striking, decent power, but his real big attribute is in his toughness and durability. The shots he absorbed against Ludovic Klein in their fight together was insane. So in my opinion, I don't see him getting knocked out in this matchup unless it's like a TKO due to like a ground and pound ref stoppage sort of situation. But in saying that, all I can give AJ is that he might have the advantage on the feet somewhat. And if he was able to keep this fight standing, there is a potential chance he could finish Seung with a very well-placed shot or potentially win a decision on strike volume. But I really do see Seung winning this fight pretty convincingly by controlling AJ with his grappling and potentially getting a finish on the ground. Minus 700 might not be good enough to put any sort of bet on, but I'll check the props on him. Seung will be the pick here, and adding him to my confident picks list. We are flying through this prediction video this week, and I think it's because this card has a lot of fights that seem a little one-sided in terms of odds. But nonetheless, moving on to the next fight down the card, Waldo Cortes-Acosta versus Ryan Spann. It's a very interesting fight. I had to look it up just because I knew both of these guys were in different divisions, and sure enough, Ryan Spann is fighting this fight at heavyweight against Waldo Cortes-Acosta. I didn't know this was happening. Ryan Spann is a pretty solid and powerful striker in the light heavyweight division, but who knows how that extra weight will affect him going into this fight. Will it make him slower or more tired or more prone to gassing out quicker? We will have to see. But back on talking about Ryan Spann, he's a solid striker, predominantly a body and head hunter, doesn't really target the legs, but he does also have a few submissions in his arsenal, like the guillotine that he just got on OSP not too long ago. A few submissions he's really confident in, which is always great to have in your back pocket. Ryan Spann can also mix in the grappling sometimes, but he does prefer to fight on the feet. Waldo Cortes-Acosta, on the other hand, solid striker, overall quite technical for a heavyweight. He's looked solid in all of his fights, even in his only loss, which was a close fight against Marcos Rodrigo de Lima. He had an impressive ability in that fight to line up some real power shots, and overall, he seemed pretty defensively solid as well to stay safe. He will be looking to do more damage on the feet against Spann and potentially get the KO here. He also has his own decent wrestling game, but his solid takedown defense and ability to get up is more notable to mention. I think this fight will be a stand-up fight predominantly, and I just think that I will trust in Waldo Cortes-Acosta and his offensive and defensive striking ability more than Ryan Spann's. It's not that Spann can't get a knockout or isn't great in general, it's just that I do see him getting clipped a lot in his fights, and he doesn't always get wobbled, but man, even in his fight with Anthony Smith, he was taking massive shots. He got put out bad by Bogdan Guskov as well not too long ago. I just see more holes in his game, and the only person to beat Cortes-Acosta is Marcos Rogerio de Lima. like I said, but he used a lot of leg kicks in that fight to slow him down, and I'm not sure I've ever seen Ryan Spann throw a leg kick in a fight when he needed it. Literally threw 0 leg kicks in his fight with Anthony Smith, and that would have been an amazing game plan to have in that fight. I'm going to go with reliability and Waldo Cortes-Acosta. That is my pick. Moving on to the main card now in Seung Choi versus Kevin Vallejos. This is one of those fights that's going to have a quick pick here. I'm going to go with Kevin Vallejos or Vallejos in his UFC debut, and mark my words, I don't care if he doesn't win this one somehow. Let's just say he loses it, even though it's unlikely. I honestly believe he will be able to be ranked in the flyweight division someday in the future. That's how much talent and skill this young man possesses. Currently 14-1, with his only loss being on the Contender Series to none other than Gene Silva himself. He's an insane fighter, very much like Ilia Topuria with how he stands, since he has a boxing base, incredibly fast, powerful, has crazy combinations in his pocket. The kid has it all in the stand-up. He's even got some decent wrestling, decent grappling and clinching, along with some decent takedown defense. Seung Choi, on the other hand, although he is a pretty decent talent overall, he has lost his last 4 fights out of 5. And granted, it has been against some pretty decent level UFC competition, but still not what you want to see, especially since a few of them have been by KO. I really do think it's a problem with fight IQ with Seung Choi. This might be the biggest problem for him because he potentially is quite technical and he does have some athleticism, but he tends to brawl with guys, and guys can take him into brawls very easily. Pretty quick pick here, guys, but that is my reasoning for the pick. Kevin Vallejos, confident picks list edition, and in my opinion, definite future UFC ranked featherweight. I think I said flyweight earlier, but it is featherweight. Moving on to the next fight of the card, Diyar Nurgozhay versus Brendson Ribeiro. This whole card is going to be quick picks, but I ain't putting this one in my confident picks list because a lot of the time in the light heavyweight division, and especially with UFC debuters, there can be upsets or moments of poor performance. Diyar Nurgozhay is the UFC debuter in this case. He is a solid striker, but he can mix things up in the octagon if he needs to. He's a powerful dude with strong kicks, and he just knocked out his last opponent with a beautiful left high kick. Speaking of those kicks, a tough matchup for a lot of guys in the division since he is pretty solid defensively as well. As for Brendson Ribeiro, he's a fast guy, he's got power, he can be decently technical when he wants to be, but the guy just seems to either get himself into a brawl or he sort of just has no option, it seems, just because he seems to get outstriked a lot and sort of seems to slow down in fights going into the later rounds. I think if Diyar Nurgozhay uses his grappling in this fight, he could have an easier time with little resistance, but if he decides to stand up and strike with Ribeiro, it's a little risky. But I'd even favor him in a brawl, and I'd definitely favor him in a skill tit-for-tat striking fight. Diyar Nurgozhay is the pick, but hard to put him in my confident picks list for this, but it is a close one. Also, I do want to mention Diyar Nurgozhay has this weird tick. It's similar to Dustin Poirier's tick in terms of pulling up his shorts, but he seems to rub his face or nose or eyes quite a lot, and it wasn't just a one-time thing. I went back and looked at another fight he had, and he did the exact same thing. If you guys noticed this before, let me know, or if you noticed this on Fight Night, come back to this video and write it in the comment section below, because it does seem strange how often he rubs his face, his eyes, and his mouth. It's really strange. Crazy tick to have. Moving on though to Blackshear versus Cody Gibson. Now guys, I'm not gonna lie to you. I see Cody Gibson as a plus 310 underdog right now, and it really makes me want to pick him just because I believe the odds should be a lot closer than what they are. But that being said, I still believe that the smart pick to go for with this prediction is Blackshear. He's the better BJJ artist. He's maybe not the best wrestler of the two, but I think he's the more talented grappler overall. He's got more power, his striking is quite clean and technical, he's coming into his prime, while Cody is 37 years old, 21-10. He's shown already that he can be struck cleanly and outstruck in fights to a decision and overall just beaten down. Brad Katona, in their absolute barn burner of a fight together, really was able to hurt Cody Gibson multiple times in that fight, and he was able to just just hit him at will in a very high-paced fight. Cody may be durable, but he is very hittable. That's my only issue with him. He's got good pace, he's got good pressure overall in the stand-up. That's what's making me want to pick him a bit, since a part of me could see him being quite durable and wearing down Blackshear in this fight to win a decision. But I think the easier pick here is Blackshear, most likely winning by decision, maybe 29-28, but losing the third round. That's my pick for this fight. I think they'll neutralize each other a bit on the ground because they are both good grapplers, and this will end up being a stand-up fight for the most part of it. I think if anyone tries to take this fight to the ground, though, it will be Blackshear. That's just my opinion. Blackshear is the pick. Moving on to the feature fight of the card, Alexander Hernandez versus Kurt Holobaugh. This is a close fight, honestly, between these two. I do think these guys are similar in some ways. I also think this fight is going to be relatively close. Might end up being a split decision victory for one of these fighters. I do, however, really like Kurt Holobaugh and his fallback on BJJ game and his overall striking pressure. I think the guy has very good cardio. He's also shown he can keep a solid pace while pressuring his opponents. Alexander Hernandez is coming off of a split decision win versus Austin Hubbard, whilst Kurt Holobaugh was able to submit Austin Hubbard in the second round of their fight, which was on the Ultimate Fighter, I believe. I think a lot of things lean towards Kurt Holobaugh, which is funny to me because he's actually the slight underdog in this matchup, and I think that it's because Alexander Hernandez is a little bit hit or miss with some performances. He can look quite solid sometimes, especially in the first or second round of fights, but he is a little inconsistent. I'm gonna go for an exact prediction here and say that Alexander Hernandez has a solid first round. They both have a close second round, hopefully edging it to Kurt Holobaugh, and then Kurt takes over the third round, almost getting a finish, but it ends up going to decision and he wins a split decision victory. Imagine if all of that comes true, guys. It would be insane for sure. Kurt Holobaugh will be the pick, most likely by decision win. Moving on to the co-main event of the card, Chidi Njokuani versus Ilizuz Zaleski dos Santos. Honestly, this feels like a pretty easy one to pick for me, but it doesn't mean it's guaranteed. And what I mean by that is that Chidi Njokuani is a powerhouse with his striking. He's got some very solid knees and elbows. He's a tall fighter, which is fantastic. But the only downfall of Chidi is that he has a history of fading in his fights and losing fights he's looking solid in. He did this most apparently in his fight with Mikhail Oleksiejczuk, where he rocked Mikhail in the first round and was following up only to wilt and get finished within that very same round. The guy is dangerous, but not consistent enough for me wanting to pick him, especially when he's versing a very hard to beat and very tricky veteran in Zaleski dos Santos. He's great on the feet, has a fantastic BJJ and grappling game, and he's shown he can go very comfortably the full 3 rounds at a very high pace. The man has had very close losses in the UFC, and he has beaten some solid names in George Strickland and Benoit Saint Denis. I think Ilizuz Zaleski dos Santos could potentially win this fight on the feet by out-voluming Njokuani and out-striking him, but he even could use his solid grappling game to fall back on if he wants to use it. But even if he doesn't use it, I still think he wins this fight. I'm going to go with the reliability of Ilizuz Zaleski dos Santos to get this one done, potentially by later rounds finish or unanimous decision win. That's my pick, and we now can move on to the final fight of the card and the main event of the evening, Marvin Vettori versus Roman Dolidze 2. Now, although a lot of these fights have been quite quick in terms of predicting, I think this fight was the hardest to figure out for me initially, and that's because of a multitude of factors. But before we get into everything, I do want to point out that the subscribers poll on who you guys think will win this main event, it's currently sitting with a slight amount of votes leaning towards Marvin Vettori, but I will be checking on the poll and taking the final update right until the card takes place. So please get your votes in. Now to get back to the video and my reasons for why this was so hard to predict. First of all, this is a rematch, and they had a decently close fight where Vettori was able to win a decision victory. This was 2 years ago, so it was relatively recent. The fight was competitive though, in my opinion, with it being closer than what the scorecards read. One of the judges even gave a 30-27 to Marvin, which I do think was pretty ridiculous. I thought the first round probably went to Dolidze, watching it live, second round Marvin, and then the third round was pretty close, and it was a bit of a toss-up. I might have lent Marvin watching it live. Roman has improved quite a bit in the stand-up, in my opinion, not leaps and bounds, but he has been looking a little more comfortable and confident on the feet in his last 3 fights. And this is all while Marvin actually hasn't fought since his last fight with Jared Cannonier, which was the other point I was going to bring up, because Marvin has been inactive for almost 2 years with injuries. He's had a really bad shoulder injury that needed surgery, and I thought he was still having trouble with it even recently, but now he's back fighting in March of 2025, and we have no idea how he will look post-surgery or post-long layoff. And the third thing I'm going to bring up, the last thing as well, is that this will be a 5-round fight, and it could possibly go down to who has the better cardio, just because both these guys are pretty much impossible to finish on the feet. I honestly think that Marvin might have the better pace and the better cardio, but I feel like I just can't trust and I can't favor someone to win when they are coming back from such a long layoff with a really bad injury and potentially still carrying an injury into the octagon. I also think that this could be a different fight with Dolidze, and Dolidze could actually try to take him down and engage in the grappling this time, since it was solely a stand-up fight last time with no takedowns. I think he is the better grappler and should be able to do well on the ground if he implements his takedowns in this fight. My final prediction is Roman Dolidze by decision win, but the fight is still relatively close on paper. That's it for my main event pick, guys, and that's it for my full card predictions and breakdown for UFC Fight Night Vettori versus Dolidze 2. If you guys have any thoughts or questions regarding the card, regarding bets, feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to respond to every single comment left in the comment section. Thanks for watching, guys, and see you guys next time.